I'm Juanita Garcia. I am a tech entrepreneur with a background in green building and lead consulting.
All right, we're just going to keep that rolling. Your next presenter, she has a podcast available that you can download and listen to called Shades of Green. And she does a lot of working with green building, which she is going to tell you all about right now. Please welcome to the stage, Juanita Garcia!
All right, guys. So I'm going to talk about green building. The ocean sea levels have risen 8 inches in the last century, and fracking is causing earthquakes. The reality is the planet will be fine. It's dealt with ice ages. It's dealt with earthquakes and global extinctions. The planet will be fine. It's people that'll end up fucked. Now, we spend about 90% of our time in the built environment. And one of those ways we can look towards making our life on this earth a little better, one of the things I do have to say is sustainability is a word I really have trouble with. Now, if I ask you, how are you doing? And you say sustained, I know something's wrong, right? So that's another issue. But let's think about resilience. Let's think about how we can have a resilient life on this earth, right? And one of those ways to do that is to think about how much of our energy and water and materials are used in the built environment. So I'm going to go over some strategies we can go over to make our lives a little better for a little longer on this earth. So we'll go over location, energy, water, and materials. So first off, talking about location, ideally, when we think about having to use a building, having to repurpose a building is much more ideal than having to build a building from the ground up. If we can do that, we're able to reduce a lot of the demolition waste that we would have for tearing down a building and not have to use all the resources, mine materials, and have to manufacture them to build a new building, right? So that's one strategy. Another issue too is we can also think about if we're using an existing building and repurposing it, we're also not using virgin land that would otherwise be maybe habitat for animals, any sort of wildlife, and then once we also talk about location, we can also talk about how we get to those buildings, right? So we have a building now. How do we get to and from that building? Ideally, you'll have opportunities to get to and from that space with mass transit, right? So if we can use public transportation and also have infrastructure to walk to the space and ideally also active transportation to bike to the space, that's great. And if you know me, I'm a great advocate for public transportation for other people, but I drive a lot more than I should, but I love being in my car by myself and, being able to turn on my music and listen to NPR and do all these things that I like to do in my little bubble in my car. And I appreciate the irony that I'm stuck in traffic with everyone else stuck in their car by themselves. And that brings us to energy. I know we love to talk about strategies for showing off our green cred with hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, and that's cool. And also, being able to show off having solar panels. Oftentimes, people love to show off their green cred with solar panels and those electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. But the thing is, with energy, it's great to be able to use renewable energy, but we don't talk about those less sexy ways of reducing energy demand to begin with. And having spent 15 years designing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, there's not a lot of sexiness in that. No one really loves to talk about that, but the reality is a lot of energy is used in heating and cooling our spaces. So that's one way to think about reducing energy demand, so that when we do produce renewable energy, we have to produce less because of it, right? So that brings us now to water. Now, when it comes to water, there's indoor water use and outdoor water use for buildings. And indoor water use is, the stuff we use to bathe and shower, wash our hands, and flush toilets. And I'm sure you've seen those cool dual flush toilets. They're super cool. And ideally, you're using less water with those dual flush toilets. But there's also outdoor water. Now, that's something we tend to forget, and we of course have a bias to having lush green lawns, but they're so artificial and they take so many resources to maintain. Now, you can use native grasses, and there's definitely a move towards using native plants in a space, and I hear the remark that, well, they're really just weeds, aren't they? They're native grasses, and they are. I mean, one man's weeds is another man's, prairie or native grass. and I get it. I understand. There's a bias against that, wanting to control the space we're in and around our buildings. Now, we have, these beautiful spaces. We're lucky enough to have all these beautiful green spaces in Chicago and the surrounding area. We have our forest preserves in different counties. And I get it. As much as I'm an advocate for nature and the environment, I really don't like to be in it. I really enjoy the built environment. I definitely have a bias to being in it. So yeah, there's water, and then there's materials. So when it comes to materials in buildings, for too long we've been building buildings to be tomorrow's landfill. Now, you may think you don't know a whole lot about buildings and how they're made, but we learned our lessons from the Three Little Pigs about building materials, didn't we? It's something that we know from childhood, and we also saw that those two early pigs ended up having their buildings demoed out. Too often, those materials from demolition waste end up in landfills, and for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just because of the way they're made, and we didn't think about, well, we intended for it to only be used temporarily until the next cool, material that's going to be used in a space gets trendy. So, we don't have a whole lot of control over the materials that we use in buildings that we work and play in. But we can think about the materials that we use on a daily basis and look for ways to reduce the materials we do waste. Now, it's really easy to use plastic forks and knives and plastic bottles, and it does take a little bit of planning to buy and use materials that can be reused, and also an investment, right? I know that, I want my legacy to be more than a bunch of plastic in the ocean and all these materials in landfill. And I know that you may think, well, I don't have a lot of control around the built environment that I'm in. But when we think about the way we consume things and reduce it, and think about how we can do that on a daily basis, and just to consume less, and be a little more thoughtful about the things that we do consume, and think about our what we can do to make the world a little bit better, and to get beyond just sustaining Earth and to think about making it a little more resilient and think about it for future generations. So I'll urge you to do that and end on that note. So thank you.